The sun beat down on the desert with a relentless heat, turning the sand into a sea of gold that stretched farther than Eliara Quinn could see. She steered her small hovercraft across the dunes, scanning the horizon for anything useful. Wrecked starships, broken machines, and twisted metal were scattered across this barren land. The forgotten galaxy had left its marks here, and Eliara had learned long ago that one person could survive only by being clever and careful. She adjusted the controls and checked her instruments. Most of the signals around her were nothing but static or old distress beacons long dead. But then a faint pulse caught her attention. It was small, weak, and uneven, but it was real. Her heart raced. Eliara had learned to trust her instincts. Wherever this signal came from, someone, or something, needed help. She followed the pulse, descending into a narrow canyon that cut through the desert like a scar. The walls of rock glowed orange in the late afternoon sun, and sand shifted under her hovercraft as she maneuvered carefully. The closer she got, the stronger the signal became. Then at the base of the canyon she saw it, a spacecraft half buried in sand, its hull scarred and battered. Eliara landed her hovercraft a short distance away. Her boots sank into the hot sand as she approached the ship, her pulse quickening. It looked old, abandoned for decades, or maybe centuries. But the signal was still alive. She crouched beside a panel near the entrance and examined it. The controls were damaged, but her skilled hands could make something work. Carefully, she connected a portable power unit and waited. A soft hum filled the air, and a panel on the ship opened with a hiss. Inside she found them. Eggs. They were glowing faintly, pulsing with energy that seemed alive. Eliara stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. The eggs were warm, almost breathing. Something deep inside her whispered that these were no ordinary creatures. Her mind raced. She had heard stories, old legends from the edges of the galaxy about dragons, beings of immense power now thought extinct. Could these eggs be real? She hesitated for only a moment. The desert was harsh, the sun unforgiving, and the canyon offered no protection from storms or predators. But she could not leave the eggs behind. She gently lifted one in her hands, feeling a faint vibration under her fingers, almost like a heartbeat. Her heart beat faster in response. "I'll keep you safe," she whispered. "I promise." The sun sank lower and the temperature dropped, but Eliara worked quickly. She secured the eggs in a protective container she had built for delicate parts, padding it with energy-absorbing gel to prevent damage. She strapped it carefully to her hovercraft and started the long, slow journey back to her workshop on the other side of the desert. Each bump and shift made her anxious. She feared the eggs might break, but she kept steady, talking to them softly as if her voice could shield them from harm. Night fell, and the desert transformed into a place of eerie shadows. The air cooled, and strange sounds echoed off the canyon walls. Eliara kept moving, her mind alert. She had seen creatures in this desert before, hungry, scavenging things that would attack without warning. But she pressed on, ignoring the creeping fear in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose beyond survival. These eggs depended on her, and she would not fail. Hours later, she reached a plateau that offered a view of the surrounding desert. Sand stretched endlessly, broken by jagged rocks and the ruins of ancient civilizations. Eliara paused, breathing heavily. The stars began to appear, shimmering like scattered diamonds above her. She felt small and fragile in the vast emptiness, yet stronger than she had in a long time. The eggs pulsed softly in her container, and she knew she had made the right choice. Suddenly, a wind swept across the plateau, carrying fine sand that cut at her skin. Eliara tightened her grip on the hovercraft controls and adjusted her course. Sandstorms were common here, and they could destroy everything in minutes. She prayed silently that the container would hold. The desert roared around her, but she focused, moving with skill born of years surviving in harsh worlds. By the time she reached the edge of the desert, exhaustion weighed on her. Her workshop lay ahead, a small cluster of metal and scrap that somehow had become home. She landed gently, her body trembling from fatigue. The eggs were safe. She set them down inside, creating a small nest with soft padding, shielding them from the chill of the desert night. Eliara sat back, her hands resting on her knees. The workshop was quiet except for the faint hum of the energy shielding the eggs. She looked at them, glowing softly in the dim light, and wondered what they would become. Legend spoke of dragons as mighty, intelligent, and dangerous, yet here they were, fragile and helpless, needing a human's care. She smiled faintly, a mix of hope and worry twisting in her chest. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the scent of dust and sand. Eliara knew the desert would not rest and danger might come before dawn. But for now the eggs were alive and that was enough. She whispered once more, "We'll survive. I promise." As she settled in for the night, she could not have known how much this small act would change the galaxy. Somewhere in the stars, the remnants of an ancient species waited, and a human mechanic had stumbled into their fate. The desert stretched endlessly, but in her workshop, light flickered over glowing eggs, the first sparks of a story that would span worlds. And somewhere hidden in the dunes something watched. Eliara woke before sunrise, the desert cold seeping through the walls of her small workshop. The eggs lay in the center of the room, glowing softly. She had spent the night worrying, checking them again and again, unable to sleep properly. The desert was harsh and unforgiving, but here, in the quiet of her workshop, the eggs seemed to pulse with a life of their own. She carefully approached the first egg. Its glow was stronger than last night, and a fine crack had appeared along its shell. Eliara's heart beat faster. She knelt beside it, gently brushing her fingers along the cracks. The egg trembled beneath her touch, tiny movements inside hinting at life. Then with a quiet pop, a small creature broke free. It had scales that shimmered like molten silver, tiny wings folded against its body, and bright eyes that looked at her with curious intelligence. Eliara gasped, not expecting the baby dragon to be so alert. The little dragon struggled weakly, its small claws gripping the edge of the shell. Eliara lifted it carefully, holding it against her chest for warmth. The creature let out a soft hiss, almost a whisper, and Eliara felt a strange connection, as if it understood her words before she spoke them. She named it Veyr, after an old myth she had read about dragons who could survive anywhere. Veyr's tiny body shivered in the cool morning air, so Eliara wrapped it in a soft cloth and settled it in a small container she had prepared. The other eggs started to shake and Eliara realized more dragons were about to hatch. She worked quickly, moving each egg into her container, whispering reassurances. The desert outside was waking slowly, its winds quiet for the moment, giving her time to focus. One by one more dragons emerged, each different from the other. Some had scales like deep blue ice, others with red streaks like fire. They were fragile but alive and Eliara knew she had to protect them at all costs. She spent the day examining them, noting their behavior and feeding them small nutrient gels she had synthesized from scavenged materials. Veyr, the first hatchling, followed her everywhere in the workshop, tilting its head as she worked. Eliara realized quickly that these dragons were not ordinary creatures. They were intelligent, sensing her presence and reacting to her voice. When she hummed softly while working, Veyr relaxed, curling against her hand. But the desert was not safe. As she worked, a distant rumble reached her ears. Sand shifted unnaturally, and a shadow passed over the entrance of the workshop. Eliara stiffened. From the canyon above, she could see shapes moving, scouts, alien drones, the remnants of the faction that had destroyed the dragon's home. She had hoped to remain unnoticed, but it seemed her rescue had drawn attention. Eliara stayed calm. Her first instinct was to protect the hatchlings. She activated the workshop's energy shields, a thin barrier that could hold for a few minutes, enough to give her time to move the dragons if necessary. The creatures hissed and shrieked softly, sensing the danger. Veyr nuzzled her hand as if encouraging her to be brave. Eliara felt a swell of determination. She had saved them from the desert, she could save them from anything. The sun climbed higher and the desert heat became unbearable. Eliara worked tirelessly, reinforcing the shields and preparing containers for transport. She noticed the dragons were reacting to temperature changes. The ice-blue one seemed to shrink from the heat, curling up to preserve energy. The red-streaked one, however, appeared stronger, almost thriving in warmth. She realized she needed to monitor each dragon individually, learning their differences quickly if they were to survive. By afternoon, she decided to test the dragon's abilities. Carefully, she moved Veyr to a small, open section of the workshop. "Try to stretch your wings," she whispered. The tiny dragon blinked at her and hesitated. Then, with a sudden burst, it unfolded its wings, a thin membrane of shimmering light that vibrated slightly. It wobbled in the air but managed to hover for a few seconds. Eliara clapped softly, encouraging it. "Good, Veyr. You're learning fast." The other hatchlings watched, their eyes following every movement. Eliara realized that this was not just survival, this was the beginning of a bond. They were learning from her and she from them. Every hiss, every movement, every subtle vibration was a form of communication. By evening she had established a small routine: feeding, training, and care. The dragons began responding to her voice, curling into her hands for warmth, and even mimicking small sounds she made. Night fell and the desert grew cold again. Eliara sat in the center of the workshop, Veyr in her lap, the other dragons resting nearby. The stars above were scattered and bright, and she thought of the galaxy beyond this planet. Somewhere out there, other beings had tried to destroy these dragons, but here, in this small workshop, life was beginning anew. Eliara felt a deep sense of connection more than she had felt in years. These creatures were not just animals, they were a part of her now. She whispered stories to Veyr, tales of stars and planets, of humans and dragons working together. The little dragon's eyes glowed softly, as if absorbing every word. Eliara realized then that this bond was not just care, it was trust, and trust was powerful. She had saved them from the desert, but more importantly she had earned their faith. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the distant sound of movement again. The desert was alive with dangers, but Eliara was no longer alone. With Veyr and the hatchlings by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The first fire had sparked in the ice of the desert, and in that warmth, a fragile but unbreakable bond had formed between a human mechanic and the last descendants of a forgotten galaxy. Eliara packed the hatchlings carefully into reinforced containers, each lined with soft padding and energy shielding. Veyr perched on her shoulder, wings twitching nervously as the desert wind howled outside. She knew staying on this planet was dangerous. Alien scouts could return at any moment, and the desert offered no safety for the growing dragons. If they were to survive, she would have to leave and find a new home for them somewhere far from prying eyes. She climbed into her hovercraft, engines humming softly, and set a course for the nearest star system rumored to have abandoned colonies. The desert stretched behind her, dunes glowing under the twin suns as they sank toward the horizon. Eliara's hands moved with practiced skill over the controls. The hatchlings stirred occasionally, responding to vibrations and warmth. She whispered soothing words to them, knowing they could sense her feelings and in turn calm themselves. The journey began slowly. The hovercraft shuttled across rocky terrain, dodging jagged cliffs and deep canyons. Sandstorms erupted without warning, forcing her to land and wait until the winds passed. During these stops, she checked each hatchling, noting subtle differences. One dragon, with scales as white as frost, seemed highly sensitive to cold. Another, with fiery red stripes, flared with energy and warmth. Veyr, the first hatched, appeared to be the most intelligent, observing everything and occasionally mimicking her actions. As they crossed a particularly wide canyon, Eliara noticed faint lights moving across the cliffs above. Alien patrols. She froze, her heart hammering. The scouts were sleek, black ships designed for tracking, equipped with sensors that could detect heat and energy signatures. The dragons sensed the danger too. Veyr hissed and raised his wings slightly, a warning. Eliara held her breath. If the aliens spotted her, it could mean the end for the hatchlings. Thinking fast, she triggered a camouflaging device she had installed on the hovercraft. The metal hull shimmered and reflected the canyon walls, blending almost perfectly. The aliens passed overhead, scanning but failing to notice them. Eliara exhaled quietly. The dragons seemed to relax slightly, though their tiny bodies still twitched with tension. She realized that they were learning to sense danger just as she had. This journey would not just test her skills, it would teach them to survive. The next few days were a mix of travel and careful observation. Eliara taught the dragons how to react to their environment. She used small energy bursts to show them how to create shields and defend themselves, demonstrating techniques with simple gestures. Veyr quickly picked up on this, reacting faster than the others, while the other hatchlings followed more cautiously. By the time they reached a canyon with a deep crevasse, she noticed that Veyr could already hover briefly, balancing with surprising precision. During the nights, when the hovercraft rested, Eliara told them stories. She spoke of the galaxy, of civilizations long gone, of humans who had learned to thrive even in dangerous worlds. The dragons listened, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They seemed to understand more than she expected, tilting their heads or twitching their wings in response to her words. Eliara began to feel a connection deeper than she had ever imagined possible. These were not animals, they were beings of intelligence and emotion, capable of thought and feeling. One night, as they camped near the edge of a cliff overlooking a valley of glowing crystals, a strange energy shimmered through the air. Eliara froze. The crystals pulsed faintly, and the dragons stirred nervously. She realized the crystals were amplifying the dragon's energy, responding to their presence. Veyr extended his wings and emitted a soft hum, which caused the other hatchlings to echo with tiny vibrations. Eliara watched in awe. This planet, or whatever energy remained here, reacted to them, strengthening them in ways she could not fully understand. By mid-journey, the dragons had grown stronger and more confident. They began exploring their containers during stops, testing the boundaries and interacting with each other in complex ways. Iliera observed with pride. Veyr, now able to hover steadily, practiced small maneuvers near the hovercraft, while the red-striped dragon learned to emit small bursts of heat, enough to warm the others in cold desert nights. Each day brought new surprises and a deeper bond between Iliera and the dragons. But danger was never far. A rogue patrol from the alien faction finally appeared directly in their path. Sleek black ships descended, scanning the canyon with lethal precision. Iliara's heart pounded. She activated the hovercraft's defensive systems and guided the dragons to cover inside the ship's hold, using the energy shields to protect them. The patrol passed, but she knew this was only the beginning. The aliens would not give up so easily. The dragons hissed and flared in agitation, their instincts alerting them to threats she could barely see. Iliera realized that the journey across the Forgotten Galaxy was more than just escape. It was teaching her and the dragons to survive together. Each challenge, each obstacle, strengthened their bond and sharpened their instincts. She began to see them not as fragile hatchlings but as future defenders of themselves, beings capable of incredible power if nurtured and guided. By the time they reached a narrow pass leading out of the desert world, the sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Iliera looked at her charges, small but growing, and smiled faintly. They had survived sandstorms, alien scouts, and the endless challenges of the desert. The real journey was only beginning. Ahead lay unknown planets, strange civilizations, and challenges that would test them all. But for now they were alive, and that was enough. Veyr perched on her shoulder, wings twitching, eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. The other dragons settled beside her, alert but calm. Iliera knew she had formed a family, one that could change the future of the galaxy. Together they would continue their journey, crossing worlds and surviving dangers, learning to trust each other completely. And somewhere beyond the stars, the galaxy waited, unaware that its last dragons were on the move. Iliara's hovercraft glided silently over the jagged rocks of the canyon, the stars above like scattered diamonds in the black sky. The dragons were growing restless, sensing the tension in the air. Veyr perched on her shoulder, wings twitching nervously, eyes scanning the horizon. Something was coming. She could feel it before her instruments even registered a signal. The rogue alien faction that had destroyed the dragon's homeworld had found them. The first warning came as a distant hum, low and steady. Iliara's heart sank. She accelerated the hovercraft, but the canyon walls narrowed, forcing her to slow down. Shadows moved along the cliffs, sleek black ships with sharp edges, gliding silently, deadly. Iliara's hands tightened on the controls. She had faced danger before, but never like this. The aliens were relentless, and their weapons could tear through the hovercraft in seconds. "Stay calm," she whispered to the dragons, though she could feel her own fear. Veyr hissed softly, echoing her tension. The red-striped hatchling flared heat in small bursts, a warning signal that something was close. Iliera took a deep breath, focusing on the path ahead. She had no choice but to fight, or the dragons would be lost. The first attack came without warning. A black ship swooped down from the cliffs, energy beams slicing the air where she had been just moments before. Iliera swerved, dodging debris and sending sparks flying from the hovercraft's hull. She activated the emergency shields, a thin energy field that shimmered around them. The dragons shrieked and hissed, pressed close to her, feeling the vibrations of the attack. Iliara's mind raced. She could not outrun them, not through the narrow canyon. She had to fight smart. She remembered the old ruins scattered along the cliffs, ancient structures left from a civilization long gone. If she could lure the aliens into the ruins, she might gain an advantage. She guided the hovercraft toward a crumbling stone bridge that spanned a deep chasm. The aliens followed, weapons primed. As they entered the ruins, Iliera deployed traps she had prepared in case of emergencies. Energy nets shot out from hidden devices along the bridge, snagging one of the ships and sending it tumbling into the chasm. Another ship fired blindly, only to be caught in a pulse trap, its systems disrupted temporarily. Iliara's heart pounded with adrenaline. The dragons sensed her determination and reacted. Veyr flapped hard, using his small wings to create a gust of energy that knocked one ship off balance. The battle intensified. The aliens adapted quickly, but Iliera and the dragons were clever. The ice-white hatchling emitted a thin mist that obscured the hovercraft's energy signature, while the red-striped one directed bursts of heat at the attackers, disrupting their targeting systems. Eliara coordinated their actions instinctively, guiding the dragons as if they understood her every thought. They were no longer hatchlings hiding in fear, they were allies in combat, small but dangerous. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as the battle raged. The canyon echoed with the hum of energy shields, the screech of dragons and the thunder of alien engines. Eliara's fingers ached from steering, but she refused to give up. One by one the alien ships began to retreat, unable to cope with the combined strategy of human ingenuity and dragon power. The last ship hesitated, then disappeared over the canyon walls, leaving silence in its wake. Eliara exhaled slowly, her body trembling from exhaustion. The hovercraft hovered over the ruins, the dragons huddled close but alert. She checked each hatchling carefully. They were battered but unharmed, their scales scratched in a few places but glowing faintly with energy. Vaer blinked up at her, wings folded, chest heaving. Eliara smiled faintly, stroking his head. "We did it," she whispered. "We survived." For a moment there was peace. The canyon, once a place of danger, now felt like a sanctuary. Eliara realized that the dragons had not only grown stronger, they had learned. They understood the threat and they had acted. Together, they had turned the tables on creatures far more advanced and powerful than themselves. Her heart swelled with pride. But she knew this was not the end. The galaxy was full of hunters, and the rogue faction would return with more ships, more firepower. Eliara could not stay here. She had to move to find a place where the dragons could grow without constant fear. She looked at the horizon where distant stars glimmered and made a decision. The journey was far from over, but now they had a plan and together, nothing could stop them. The dragons huddled closer as she prepared the hovercraft for departure. Vaer brushed against her cheek, a silent show of trust. Eliara touched his head and smiled. They were more than creatures, they were her family and she would protect them no matter what. The other hatchlings watched intently, learning from every movement, every decision. They were ready to continue to leave the canyon and travel farther into the unknown. As they lifted off, the canyon fading behind them, Eliara felt a sense of hope she had not known in years. The hunters had tested them but they had survived. The dragons were learning, growing stronger with every challenge. And she, a simple mechanic from a forgotten world, had become their guide, their protector and their friend. Above the desert, the stars stretched endlessly, and Eliara charted a new course. Ahead lay uncharted systems, planets untouched by war, and the promise of safety for the dragons. She did not know what dangers awaited, but for the first time she felt ready. Together they would face the galaxy no longer as prey, but as a force to be reckoned with. Vaer leaned against her shoulder, tiny wings flicking in the low gravity of the hovercraft. The red-striped hatchling emitted a warm glow, and the ice-white one shivered, alert but calm. Eliara smiled, feeling their energy merge with hers. They were ready. The hunt was over for now, but the journey toward a safe home had only just begun. And somewhere beyond the stars the galaxy began to notice. Eliara guided the hovercraft through the final stretch of uncharted space, the stars stretching endlessly ahead. The dragons had grown stronger since leaving the desert. Vaer perched on her shoulder, wings fluttering lightly, scanning the controls with sharp, curious eyes. The red-striped hatchling emitted a faint glow, warming the small cabin, while the ice-white one adjusted to the low gravity, hovering with confidence. They were no longer fragile hatchlings, they were growing, learning, and ready for a future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Her destination was a hidden planet at the edge of the galaxy. Ancient maps and scattered signals had led her here, to a world untouched by the wars and hunters that haunted the dragon's past. As the hovercraft descended through the thin atmosphere, Eliara's heart beat faster. The planet was alive with vibrant forests, glowing rivers of energy and towering crystal formations that pulsed faintly in the dim light. This place was perfect, isolated, rich in resources and safe from alien eyes. She landed in a wide clearing surrounded by strange crystalline trees. The dragons immediately explored, moving cautiously but confidently. Vaer flapped his wings, sending sparks of light into the air, while the red-striped hatchling and ice-white one mirrored his movements, learning quickly. Eliara smiled, watching them grow in strength and awareness. She knew they would thrive here, far from the deserts and hunters that had threatened their survival. The first few days were busy. Eliara built shelters and energy barriers to protect the dragons from the planet's small but unpredictable wildlife. She cultivated plants that would provide nourishment for them and herself, using her knowledge of mechanics and biology to adapt quickly to the planet's unique environment. The dragons responded eagerly, exploring their surroundings, practicing their growing abilities and bonding more deeply with her. Veyr began communicating in small ways, using sounds and subtle vibrations to convey curiosity, joy, and concern. The other hatchlings followed suit, learning from him and from Eliara. One morning, Eliara noticed a strange glow coming from the largest crystal formation in the valley. Curious, she approached with Veyr perched on her shoulder. As she drew near, the crystals responded to the dragon's energy, pulsing brighter and sending waves of warmth through the air. The dragons reacted instinctively. Veyr stretched his wings wide, the red-striped one emitted a controlled burst of heat, and the ice-white one let out a soft hum, amplifying the energy. Eliara watched in awe. The planet seemed to bond with them, as if recognizing the return of its ancient guardians. Over time the dragons grew even stronger. Veyr could fly long distances, precise and controlled, while the others displayed unique talents. The red-striped one could manipulate small amounts of heat and energy, creating protective barriers, and the ice-white hatchling could emit chilling pulses to ward off threats. Eliara continued to guide them, teaching and protecting, while they learned from her and from the planet itself. Together they became a team, capable of facing dangers no human or dragon could face alone. Months passed and the sanctuary grew into a small but thriving home. Eliara watched the dragons soar through the crystal forests, their movements graceful and powerful. They were learning, growing, and forming bonds not just with her but with each other. She realized that this place was more than a safe haven, it was a beginning. The dragons had been abandoned, hunted, and nearly destroyed, but here they had a chance to reclaim their legacy. Eliara often sat atop a cliff overlooking the valley, watching the dragons practice their abilities. Veyr would hover near her, wings glowing faintly in the sunlight, while the other hatchlings engaged in playful combat, testing strength and agility. She thought of the desert they had left behind, the battles they had faced, and the hunters that had tried to take them. Despite it all, they had survived. They had grown, and in doing so they had changed the course of their destiny. One evening, as the sun set over the crystalline mountains, Eliara realized something profound. The dragons were no longer just her responsibility, they were a force of life, intelligence, and power, capable of shaping the galaxy in ways humans and aliens could not fully understand. She had not only saved them, she had guided them to a new beginning. She felt pride, awe, and a deep sense of connection. The dragons, sensing her thoughts, gathered around her. Veyr brushed against her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of trust. The red-striped and ice-white hatchlings nuzzled close, their energy resonating with hers. For the first time, Eliara understood that she was part of something larger than herself. She was no longer just a mechanic, she was a guardian, a teacher, and a friend to the last descendants of a forgotten galaxy. In the days that followed, Eliara and the dragons explored the planet fully. They discovered hidden valleys, glowing rivers, and ancient ruins untouched for millennia. The dragons practiced their abilities, Veyr teaching the others to fly and manipulate energy safely. Each day brought new challenges but also new growth. Eliara documented everything, preparing for the possibility that one day, others might come looking for the dragons. She wanted to be ready to protect them always. One morning she watched the dragons take flight over the valley, their scales glinting in the light, and felt a deep sense of peace. The sanctuary was thriving, the dragons were strong, and the galaxy seemed a little safer for their existence. She whispered to herself, "We made it, we survived, and we will thrive." As night fell, the crystal forest shimmered under the twin moons, and the dragons roost nearby, calm but alert. Eliara sat in the soft glow, feeling the energy of the planet, the presence of the dragons, and the weight of everything they had endured. She knew that the galaxy would continue to be dangerous, but here, in this hidden corner, life had a chance to flourish. The abandoned dragons of the forgotten galaxy now had a home, and Eliara had given them a future. The stars above twinkled, silent witnesses to a new legacy. The dragons had been saved, their strength and intelligence preserved, and a human mechanic had changed the course of their history. Together they had faced death, danger, and the unknown, and they had emerged stronger. The galaxy would never forget them, and neither would Eliara. And so, in the quiet of the hidden planet, under the glow of the crystal forests and the light of distant stars, a human and the dragons of a forgotten galaxy began their life anew, a life of hope, courage, and enduring legacy.